Hello fellow pilots, I'm Major Payne and welcome to the next episode of Advanced Fighter Pilot Training. In this episode we'll talk about possible tactics, focusing player and our role and jobs for a specific type of plane, of course, in the battles. Now, in previous episode we talked about situational awareness, how to check the player list and analyze the situation, and some tactics, of course. And today a little more about tactics, including counter tactic or bolt tactic, how I like to call it. It could be done in the beginning of the battle and in specific plane, of course. Well, maybe we'll start with an example right away. Okay, as you can see, we have a map called Peak with two factories, two garrison and command center in the middle. And here is how it's work. Two most important sectors are of course two factories. One is close to enemy resp and we call it enemy factory, another close to our rest point and we call it our factory. We check composition of both teams and we see enemy bomber is a human player and we can presume fairly that he will go straight to the enemy factory. And in our team we have like two ground attackers, human players, so we can presume that at least one of them will be able to take our factory quick enough on our side of the map. So what we do, we go straight to the enemy factory with top speed, of course. We use a boost to intercept enemy bomber or ground attacker or whatever else will be there, and by shooting down those planes we can take over enemy factory or at least we delayed enemy attempts to take it over. As you can see, I managed to intercept enemy bomber before he been able to take over the factory, which is of course perfect timing, perfect. And this tactic is only possible in some fast, heavy armed planes. It's not tactics for light fighters. A light fighter could go, but only if it's a heavy armed, fast, like Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf, for example. And of course, enemy player is not in a bomber, because light fighter could try this tactic against human player in a ground attacker, but not in a bomber, because bomber is too difficult and most likely they will be able to defend themselves, so we rather help enemy to take over the factory by getting killed over it. Now, if enemy team have players in some other types of planes than bombers and ground attackers, then this tactic is even easier for us, because obviously we're hunting down bots. As you can see, we're doing here quite well. Another ground attackers going down. So we are very close to flipping over this factory, but our ground attackers most unfortunately came over here and he just crashed. So that's a bit disappointing. But still, you see the human player in the bomber coming back to the factory, this time on high altitude, so we keep going after him. We have enough HP to take him down, just need the good approach and good surprise attack. Now he's busy with dropping bombs, so that's the perfect moment. And it's not a bad player, he have overall 60% of win rate, so he's know what he's doing. Now we get this kill and we have a bandit on our tail. It's a human player and a heavy fighter, so we slow down, we call in bots to help us, and we're doing this defensive maneuvers. We buy time so bots can take him out, specifically when he's slowed down. He's gonna be his target now. Yeah, so he's done and it's over the factory, so it's even better. Unfortunately, a factory on our side of the map is not still in our hands, which is very disappointing as well. But yeah, it's almost there, as you can see. Yeah, so we reload the bombs, we nearly finish here, this factory. Main building is damaged. And as you can see, we just take over the factory on our side of the map, so it's brilliant now. Well, let's speed up this. 7 minutes of the battle, we just get into the square line and it's over. It's just over now. We have most of the sectors. And for most of the battle we keep those factories on our side, so of of course we get a lot of points, a huge advantage. Now that's the report after battle, and as you can see, very decisive, and we have 2 kills over this bomber pilot. He is the best player, of course, in enemy team, and we have 1 kill over the human player in a light fighter. So this is how it works, and let's move to another example because there's a little bit more into this tactic. So here we go with another map, and we have rocket base. There is enemy rocket base, which is close to the enemy rest point, and we have rocket base on our right. So what we are going to do here, we're going to cross the map straight to that rocket base, and we check the composition of the team to take a look who is playing on enemy side, and we know that there is a human player in a bomber, there is human player in a ground attacker, so most likely we are not going to be able to get even to this rocket base before it's going to be flip over. But anyway, we go there because we are playing in a multi-role fighter, a tier 10 British Hawker Hunter, and he have a lot of rockets and 2 bombs, of course, and huge armament. So this is the plane which can actually take any sector by himself, like. So because of we flying in this plane, we can actually go there. Even if the enemy will take over this rocket base, we should be able to retake it quickly. So that's the whole point. If I would be playing in like heavy fighter, I wouldn't go here. That would be a waste of time, because if I go here with a heavy fighter and this rocket base is, as you see, taken over, so now I have like maximum 2 bombs if it's XF90 or Messerschmitt, and 2 bombs will not do, and it's not enough to take over this sector. So what's happened here, I just waste a little bit of my rockets, unfortunately, because I was hoping that I'm gonna stop enemy from taking over this rocket base, but that was a mistake. Now I was waiting with this ground attacker until the sector is gonna be unlocked, but unfortunately the ground attacker managed to get out from the sector, so we didn't get any points. Now, so we're taking over first the 2 heavy fighters, and then we will take care the ground targets. So you see, it's all about specific planes. It cannot be done in any plane. It have to be some multi-role or something with good armament. So not every plane can go and do that kind of tactic. So, and you always need to look into the enemy team. For example, if there will be no human players in bombers and ground attackers, then okay, you could actually go here in a heavy fighter, for example, because bots usually not taking over the sectors that quickly as human players, of course. Now, see, that's unfortunately that I used those rockets in the beginning, because now I'm missing them and I have to use my cannons. So that's why that's gonna take me quite some time to finish off this sector. And air defenses over the rocket base are serious threats, so you have to be aware of this. You can't stay over the over the rocket base for too long. And that's what I like. I've been killed by 8 defenses after I take over the sector. Anyway, the mission is accomplished. We take over the rocket base, which is looking actually funny that enemy rocket base is in our hands and our rocket base on our side of the map is in enemy hands, which is funny. But anyway, let's speed up this. As you can see, we have huge advantage in points and the game is won. So this tactic can be very effective and give a significant advantage in the initial stage of the battle. I have not mentioned something obvious for me, that our goal always have to be key sectors, not to capture a distance garrison. That would have no sense, of course. So only key sectors like factory or rocket base. And the last example of these tactics I want to show you is against top players, absolutely elite. And here I fly with my friend, just for the movie. Normally I wouldn't play like this, because when we play against very good players and you know that they are good, so and they play in a bomber or ground attacker, then we literally have very small chance to success. They usually being able to take over the factory or whatever sector it is before you get there, and when you get there you have like 30 seconds of lockdown, you waste your time, and of course unless you are in a special plane with rockets and bombs, then you're just wasting your time because you're simply not able to take it back if you for example in a heavy fighter. So this tactic can be very, very effective, but as well if you do it wrong and you just waste a lot of time, then it's going to be as well as a huge step down in the beginning. So you have to be careful with this. When this is very important to analyze the situation before and decide, are you going to apply this tactic or not, because you can very well leave your team with no points for long and just simply contribute yourself to lose. Now, as you can see here in this attack, I use my rockets and bombs to destroy some ground targets first, because that's the fastest way to stop enemy from taking over this factory, and that gives me a little bit more time to destroy the ground attackers, bombers or whatever else is here. As you can see, our team managed to take over the factory close to our rest point, so we are already gaining these points, so this is huge advantage. Enemy doesn't have the factory and we do. So before I move to another topic, I have to say that this tactic can be as well done in a bomber or ground attacker, assuming of course that in our team we are not only one playing the ground attacker or bomber, because if you do, then it's the best to take the strategic sector as quick as possible. That means the closest one. So you can go in bomber, but only if you have someone else to take the strategic sector which is close to your rest point. Okay, so now we move to another topic of this video, and it's focusing players, and that's my favorite tactic, and it's basically based on focusing good players. Take a look. So it's kind of simple, yes? We attack good player and thanks to that we win battles. Well, not so simple. Good players, as they are good, it's not so easy to shut them down. First you need to also know who is this key player, and you can usually see it after first 1 or 2 minutes, but just many players don't press tab until the end of the battle. And you have to, like, if you want to check who is doing what and where, how many personal points, you just press tab, look on the minimap and the teams, and you will know. The personal points are most often the largest indicator, but not only. Sometimes you may meet player who is actually parked in the center of the map, let's say in an airfield, and he's just killing bots and have a huge amount of personal points. But if there is someone else who's going around the map and taking over the sectors, then that's your target, that's your real goal. And you can recognize this by chevrons, I think, even more than personal points. So if you see someone who have more chevrons but slightly less personal points, then this is your guy, and that's the player who should be targeted and stopped basically from doing what he's doing, because he's basically winning the battle for the enemy. And sometimes you can also recognize someone nickname in the beginning of the battle, and you know straight away that, yeah, this is a guy who I have to watch out for and, you know, target him basically. Next we have to have basically the right plane for the job. There's absolutely no need to follow some good player in a wrong plane. So usually the heavy fighter is very good for this role, because heavy fighter can go after a player in the bombers. But not only heavy fighters are good, there are a lot of light fighters which can have similar role. A lot of depends, of course, from who actually you are going to target. If you're hunting down the enemy in a light fighter or multi-role fighter or heavy fighter, then light fighters are absolutely fine for this job. And for example, like on tier 5 we have German Messerschmitt Me 209V4, or tier 6 Me 209F. On tier 7, let's say Kostikov 302. On tier 8 there is J8, and tier 9 F6U Pirate, and tier 10, of course, there is a very fast plane like Swift and FW252. So there is a few good planes which can fulfill such a role. I just, of course, pick up some extreme examples. A very fast plane with high altitude performance. Often they have a weak armament, like for example Messerschmitt F109F or J8. Such planes have a hard time in taking sectors, so they are like snipers on a battlefield. Have to choose high value targets, and such targets are not defense plane or bots. These targets are good players who do very well in a battle, and by shooting them down we have big impact and contribute well to win in a battle. Often, of course, personal points are not going to reflect this, so keep that in mind. Even if you have huge contribution to the win, but your personal points may not always reflect this. And a few other tips, let's say, always press F4, so when you attack some target, send the bots to attack as well. They may help you in some situations. Additional advice, let's say, just it's not to overdo it, so you must also be able to do something else in a battle. A total fixation on a target will not be often like good, like, you know, that's going to be disastrous sometimes. If you just fly across the map to shoot someone down, it's not going to pay off to you. So remember that square line is particularly important. Shooting down the player a second after a square, like, that give you huge advantage. I have a good example here, like I'm gonna show you now. In this one I play with my friend in a flight. On the opposite team we have very good players, elite players, in a flight too as well. And it's interesting battle because I will be targeting the player on a bomber, and here I go in a heavy fighter, and enemy flight have light fighter which are going to target me. So that's very interesting. And of course there's going to be like key moment after the square line. But first, factory. So as you see, I'm going here straight for the factory. This is a key sector on this map. And I'm looking for the bomber, but I can't see him, so I dive to drop my bombs, but then he's gonna show up, but that's too late, and I'm just diving to destroy some building. And thanks to that, you know, buy some time, so I get more time to destroy the bomber. But because of this dive, I lose my good position to attack the bomber. Now I'm in little trouble now. I have to get out from this tail gunner fire, but I keep pursue this bomber, and so he didn't manage to take over this factory. And not a perfect fight. We're still in a tail gun fire, but we eventually managed to kill him here. But as you see, that's not a perfect job because we're just barely alive. But still, job is done because bomber is down, factory is not been taken over, so it's fine. And our bomber is working on other side of the map, and no one is actually interfere in his work. So the thing is that I'm not focusing completely on one player. I have other jobs to do as well. I destroy some human player in another bomber, I take over some other sectors, I help to defend some sectors, stuff like this. So it's not about complete fixation over the target. So keep that in mind. You need to be able to do some other jobs as well, yeah. And when you taking down the bombers, really that have to be before he take over the factory, because if he gonna take the factory, that's really have not much impact when you shut down this bomber. It's better if you go and take over some other sectors in the meantime than simply kill the bomber just after he take over the sector. Now, the enemy light fighter, however, very good player, but he didn't manage to kill me over the sector. So each time he killed me, that doesn't been huge impact to the battle. Of course, it is impact, but not that much if that would be over the sector. And if enemy light fighter is giving cover to the bomber, then even more than in other situation, focus on taking over sectors and other jobs basically, so you can survive until the square line. And quite good example in this battle is that the light fighter here make amazing amount of personal points, but that doesn't mean that he's gonna win the battle. He's not that most dangerous player here. The biggest threat here is the bomber pilot, because he is capable of taking over the factory. He is capable of taking this command center and even garrison probably quicker than light fighter. So we focus on taking over sectors. We have this square line now, and we look for the bomber pilot. That's the main thing, to take him out, because he's the most important in this battle. Of course, I'm not saying that he's better or something like that. No, not at all. Just because of the bombers have such a big impact to the games at the current state of the game. And here we go. We have him here, so in vulnerable position, not full HP, which is great on low altitude. Unfortunately, he managed to take this factory, but it's fine because I have still my friend here in a bomber, in a flight, and he would be able absolutely easy peasy job to take over this factory. In the meantime, this really good player in a MiG-15 actually get killed, so it's even better. And now this is it. Like, if you see, even if they have slightly more points, but that doesn't matter because they are out of the battle now. We have a lot of time to turn this battle into our favor now, yeah, because there is no player. So we focus them after the square line. I mean, at least one of them. And we get the bomber. I did damage a little bit this MiG-15, so that helps definitely, so some bots can take him out or whatever. But then, as you see now, we are the only players in the battle, so it's all up to us now. Square line is a key moment in that kind of battles. As you can see, the battle is won, but it was extremely difficult, and also I salute to my wingman in this flight, who really show his skills, not for the first time. He's just learning quickly and outperformance his general or statistic, let's say, which are, like, if I remember right, like slightly over 51% of win. But he's a great eagle and learn fast and play at a very high level. So you see, that's what being in a clan can give you. And just take a look as well on the final results, and you can clearly see that the light fighters did the most of the points in this game, but the bomber pilot did a lot of chevrons, more chevrons. He have like 5 chevrons, and the light fighters have 4, but he have over 21,000 points, and bomber pilot have 18,000 points. So that's what I was talking about earlier on, that the key player in this game was a bomber pilot, which was taking over the sectors, and if we wouldn't get him killed after squareline, he would take over some other sectors, and that win, well, it's possible that we wouldn't win this game. So that's how you recognize these most important players. Finally, let's talk purely theoretically about different role for different types of planes. I pick up few map layouts here, and we can talk a little bit about possible tactics in the beginning of the engagement. So let's start from the light fighters. So on this map, light fighters mainly should focus in the middle of the map, which is airbase. And this airbase is very important strategic position in this map, because basically this is a rest point for your team. You can repair your plane, you can change your plane if you want, and you have very short distance to another sector from here. So this is very important place, yeah. And as usually, you need to check your enemy team first. So if you, for example, see that there is a much better light fighter on enemy team, and most likely he will go here, so you may use some different tactic in the beginning. You don't necessarily have to go for that airfield. Of course, I'm not recommending to let it go. But if you're like 100% sure that there is a good player in the light fighters, it's a better, more maneuverable, or maybe it's a tier higher or something like that, then you can try to go for a garrison first, take the garrison quickly, and then from here you can decide, or you're going to go for a rocket base if some of your teammates, of course, go in there, because you need some bomber or ground attacker to destroy the ground targets, so maybe some multi-role is going there, so stuff like this. And of course you can also come back to the middle of the map and try to take over the airfields, specifically if this hypothetically this good player, for example, leave this airbase and he go for another sector or something like that, then you can use this opportunity. But anyway, I strongly recommend you first in the first place to focus on airbase if you are a light fighter, because this is a perfect sector for light fighters. There's a lot of aerial targets that you can shut down, and by this you can gain a lot of points and flip over that zone. And I always encourage everyone to look into your own plane, the good strong side of your plane. Like if you have maybe your plane is less maneuverable, but it's much more faster and can go on higher altitude, or maybe have more firepower, that kind of stuff. So you have to use this advantage and, for example, go a little bit higher and pick up this good player and attack him from surprise, and pick him up first, and then you can try to take over this sector. So I personally would always go there in light fighter and try to take over this airbase. Of course, there's different kind of situation, like if you play on your own and you see that there's an enemy team and there is a flight, two players in light fighters, and they're very good and they cover themselves in the middle, so you literally have no chance against them too. So you definitely have to focus on any other sector, like other garrisons, other rocket bases. So yeah, that's it about light fighters. Let's move to the heavy fighters. So heavy fighters can do pretty much everything on this map, because they have such a speed and altitude performance that they can move to any sector. So you can go into the middle of the map, you can help your team to pick up this good enemy light fighters, for example, or you can hunt down the enemy bomber. But as I mentioned, I think earlier on, then you can go across the map for the enemy rocket base, but if there's a good player in bomber or ground attackers, then that will be rather a waste of time, so you can do that. But if there is bots on ground attackers and bombers, then you can try that, of course. Or maybe if you see that none of your teammates go in for this garrison here, so you can go for the garrison yourself and flip it over by your own. Some heavy fighters have bombs and rockets. If you have bombs and rockets, you can go for a rocket base on your side of the map. Specifically, if in your team you're missing a human player in a bomber or ground attacker, then you can't really rely on bots that they're gonna take over the sector quickly. Sometimes bots really struggle to take this sector. So if you have bombs and rockets, you can go there, make sure that you're gonna have that quickly, and then you can decide from here where to go, or you go to the middle of the map, or you go for the garrison, that kind of stuff. We're moving to the multi-role fighters now, and as the name says, multi-role, that means multitask, like you can do everything as well. Of course, there are different kind of multi-role fighters. Some of them are more like a fighter, some of them are a little bit more like ground attackers, and so on. So it's all depend what kind of plane you're playing, and of course enemy team. You have to check out enemy team. You can go pretty much everything. You can go for the rocket base, you can go for the garrison, and if there is no like good light fighters on enemy team, you can try to help your team to take over the airbase. And if you have a lot of bombs and rockets, try to go for a rocket base on your side. So pretty much a lot of possibilities. So that's why the multi-role fighters are actually very difficult to play, because they require you to really, really well analyze the situation, enemy team, and situational awareness like 100%. Because pretty often if there is a human playing in a light fighter, they usually have huge advantage over multi-role fighters. So there are cases like if there is a very good player in light fighters, you may need to be a little bit stealthy in this multi-role and sneak behind the enemy lines and take for example, rocket base. Like for example, start from garrison, then use the route just beside the end of the map, and then surprise attack on the rocket base you can do. So there's a lot of option for multi-role fighters. They can do pretty much a lot. You can defend as well, So basically, in the beginning, you have a lot of options, but you need to carefully pick the right one. It's always based on layout of the enemy team, what you have, what kind of players on what planes they play, that kind of stuff. Now, ground attackers and bombers have pretty much the same role, basically. They simply flip over these strategic sectors like rocket base or mining factory, that kind of stuff. But in this map, we have, of course, 2 rocket base. So ground attacker or bomber can go for this rocket base here or rocket base on our side of the map. So that's always depend on enemy team and your own team. So if there is enemy team without human player in the bombers and ground attackers, yes, of course, you can try this move, go across and bomb this, or use the ground attack or whatever. And the same here, if in your team there is no one else on ground attacker or bomber, then you should definitely go for this airbase because it's close to your rest points and you will be taking over that very quickly. But for example, if there is a bomber player in your team, then you don't have to be necessarily greedy. You can go for something else, like you can take this garrison, and from here you can go for another rocket base. So don't do such a thing, like if there is a human player and a bomber in your team and you are on a ground attacker and you're going together on the same sector. So that's pretty much not the best idea. So be aware of that, of course, that this just better to split and take more at once than waste your time in rocket base, where this before you get there in a ground attacker, bombers will drop the bombs and you will what you're gonna do, destroy one air defense 20 points building, so that's not much, and that this is a waste of time then. And the same with bombers, exactly the same thing for the bombers. Bombers and ground attackers should focus on strategic position like rocket bases, and if they are in our side, like if our team have those sectors, then you can go for garrison and then you can go for airbase, that kind of stuff. Of course, when you are on the way to enemy rocket base, you can go for the garrison. You don't have to go straight across the map. Like if you go with bomber, take over this rocket base, then you're not going straight for another rocket base. You can go here if you bomb or reload now, so you can try to take over this garrison, and then from here you're gonna go for the rocket base. So that's basically how the bomber should operate. So that's another map layout, and let's start from the light fighters. Light fighters can do pretty much a lot on this map. You can go for the middle, you can go for the garrison, and you can go for the command center in the beginning of the engagement. But I would recommend rather the command center first, because this is strategic position, and that's gonna send bombers to take over the factory if needed, So this is a very important sector. Of course, the airbase is pretty important as well, because that's not the airbase, sorry, that's airfield, and of course you cannot repair your plane, you cannot change your plane, but that's still a rest point in the middle of the map. So that gives you some kind of advantage to your team, that you're gonna start closer to important sectors. Like that's the light fighters, basically these. And command center, of course, that there's only 3 defense aircraft over there. So technically, if you will go on your own, you won't be able to take it over by your own. But it's always happened that enemy planes from this rest point will go for the command center. So that's going to be a lot of more planes on this command center than you need to flip it over. So it's absolutely a good idea to go there and fight for it. Let's move to the heavy fighters. Now, heavy fighters can do pretty much everything as usually on the map. So you can go for the command center and help your team to take it over, destroy the bombers or whatever is going to be there. But if there is a human player in a bomber, they pretty often like to go straight for the factory. So you can go there as well and intercept the enemy bomber. And even if there is no human player in a bomber, then you can go there anyway and maybe drop some of your bombs or rocket if you have, or just wait for the bots to come into this factory and you can shut them down and take over the factory thanks to that, You can also try to take the first this garrison and then from here go straight for the factory. that's pretty good idea as well, specifically if there is no human player in the bombers, because that gives you some extra time for this factory, so you can spend some time on taking over this garrison, and then you go for the factory. But if there is a human player, specifically good players, they will go straight for the factory, so you're rather supposed to go and try to intercept them. As I actually show you on in this video in the beginning, I was playing in XF90. Yeah, so that kind of stuff for heavy fighter. Now let's move for multi-role. Multi-role fighters are capable planes, of course. As I mentioned, they can do pretty much everything. So I would rather go with, if my multi-role fighter have some bombs and rocket, I would rather go and fight for the factory or for command center. One of those two. It all depends, of course, from enemy team, what they have, what kind of players are in there. Like, you know, if there's very good human player on light fighters, you literally pretty often have to avoid him, because multi-role fighters are pretty much vulnerable to good light fighters. So it all depends. If there is no human player on bombers and ground attackers, then I would rather go for garrison and then for the for this factory, and from there maybe for another garrison and that kind of stuff. So basically the role of the multi-role fighter is to flip over the sectors and sometimes defend some sectors. So, but basically flip over and flip over and flip over, keep going and take another and another sector. That's the main job of the multi-role fighters. Okay, so let's move to the ground attackers and bombers. So ground attackers and bomber have two main targets on this map. We have this command center here and we have factory over here. So that's the two most important sectors, most important targets for the ground attackers. Specifically this factory. So if you play in a ground attacker and bomber, you need to, and if you flip over this sector, it's your sector, your team, and you see that there's a human player, enemy or whatever, and it's gonna retake this factory, then you have to be aware of that and you have to be right here and retake that as quick as possible before this factory will reload 80 points. That's the main job of yours. So keep an eye on the map and always come back to the factory before the factory is gonna reload 80 points. You need to be able to retake it. So in the beginning of the battle you can choose those two directions. Sometimes of course you can go first for the garrison and then from the garrison for the factory. So it all depends of the enemy team. If in an enemy team there is only bots on bombers and ground attackers, you may go first for the garrison and then for the factory. But if there is a human player, I would rather go straight for the factory, so we're not gonna allow enemy player to take over this. And that's gonna be a fight here over it. Specifically if there is human player on the ground attackers, so yeah, you probably noticed that the ground attackers have a dogfights as well between each other. The less important sector is of course this airfield for ground attackers and bombers. This is not very good target because there is not many ground targets on it and they have very little value. So that's the last sector you should go for, I guess. Focus on main sectors like command center and factory, and then of course two garrisons are like secondary objective as well, but this is the last thing you want to go, it's airfield. Okay, so we can move to another map layout and we start from the light fighters, and light fighters here of course going for the airfield first. That's the main target, center of the map, repair, and you can change the plane of course. So this is a strategic sector for the light fighters, very important. But if of course something happened that you are not able to take it, there's too good players on enemy team, or there are too many good players on light fighters on enemy team, whatever it is, then just change your direction, go for the garrisons, or even for the command center. You can try the command center, specifically if there's someone else who's gone there with you, because obviously light fighter cannot take it by its own, but by yourself. So yeah, that's the basically role for the light fighters. And of course when you eventually take over the airfield, be aware that your team may need you somewhere else. You can't stay here forever. Just look around, and if you need, of course, you can defend the airfield, but don't overdo it. Just keep an eye on the minimap, and if you see the opportunity, go for another sector. And if in enemy team have no human player in the bombers, but they have human players in the ground attackers, then keep an eye on the factory, of course, because if your team take it, or even if your team doesn't take it, then keep an eye on it, because if you see that the ground attacker is going here, then you have to intercept them and destroy them over the factory. That's gonna help your team to take over this factory. So keep an eye on the ground attackers, because light fighters will definitely be able to do that. Yeah, that's it for light fighters. Let's move for heavy fighters. So in a heavy fighter, you can do three things in the beginning of the battle. Mainly, you can go and help your team to take over the factory if you have some bombs and rockets. If you see that there is no human player in a bomber or ground attacker in your team, then you can go and drop your bombs on the factory and make sure that your team will have it as quick as possible. You can also go in the middle of the map and hunt down the enemy light fighters, or whoever is the biggest threat in the middle, so you can help your team to take over the airfield, which is strategic position as well. And there's another option. You can go straight for the command center and then just interfere into enemy attempts to take over the sector. Even if you delay that, you don't have to take it. Even if you delay that, that's a good, already good achievement. Yeah, and as well, it could be a situation like you see that most of the team going for the middle, some going for the factory, and no one's going for the garrison. You can go first for the garrison as well if you see that there is no one else to do that. But I would rather go and focus some good players and work over the factory or over command center, or maybe in the middle of the map in the beginning of the engagement. So it all depends from your enemy team and your own team, what kind of players you have on what planes. But that's pretty much for the heavy fighter. They can do pretty much a lot of tasks in these battles. Let's move to multi-role. Multi-role fighters, as we mentioned, can do pretty much everything, but in the beginning, if there is an option for that, I would go for the middle for this airbase. If there is no very good players, if there are not many good players on light fighters, that kind of stuff, if you feel that this is possible, then go in the middle of the map and help your team to take over the airbase, because this is significant advantage. But if you see that there is a bunch of good players on light fighters, and there will be little chance that you are actually be successful here, then go for the garrison, take garrison on, and always that some kind of points already will be supplied to your team. And from this garrison you can go for the command center. You can try to take out this command center after enemy will leave this sector, or as well there is an option in the beginning of the battle. If you see that your team doesn't have the good players on bombers and ground attackers, and you have some armament to attack the ground targets, then go for a factory and help your team to take over the factory. This is a key sector here, and from factory you can go for the garrison and so on. Specifically if there is no option for you to take over the airbase in the middle, because there is some overwhelming forces of enemy. There's too many players on light fighters, for example. So that's pretty much about the ground attackers, multi-role fighters. Now let's move to ground attackers and bombers. So ground attackers and bombers usually go straight for the factory, and this is a good choice usually. But if you are sure that you have a bomber player or ground attacker player in your team, then you may split. Or if you are in a flight together and your teammate have a bomber and you have ground attacker, then definitely split, and one of you will be enough to take over the factory, and then you can take, for example, garrison, or even go into the middle in a ground attacker and help your team to take over the airbase. So that's that there's a few good options here, but it's only if you have another good human player in a bomber or ground attacker, because if you don't have it, then basically that's the only option you have, is to go for the most important sector, which is factory. So that's it about the ground attacker and bombers here, specifically in the beginning of the battle, because after that, It all depends about the situation on the map. But if you decide to go, for example, for the garrison, then the best course of action after this is go for the command center. Sorry. And if you have this, if you go for the factory, then the best way is to go for a garrison here. Unless, of course, you see on the map that there is a little plane in the middle, and there is some chance that you're gonna help your team to take over the airbase. So keep that airbase always on mind. Alright, that's it. Let's move to another map layout. Alright, so on this another map we have 4 garrisons and airbase in the middle of the map. So this map is basically a really good map for the light fighters. Light fighters can do a lot of here. So obviously in the beginning of engagement light fighters should try to go for the airbase, but again, if there's overwhelming enemy with, for example, flight or tier higher or better planes, then you can try to go for the garrisons and you can win the game by controlling the garrison on the sides of the map. But that's more difficult because enemy from the airbase can still move to the garrisons and have very short distance here and can repair the planes and so on. So anyway, light fighters are key in this battle. They can be very successful here. Heavy fighters, of course, they can hunt down some good players, they can target players, but they are less capable of taking over the sectors like garrisons. That's take you more time to take garrisons in heavy fighter, and then so this is basically a race who is gonna flip over as quick as possible those garrisons and who is gonna control the airbase. So main thing is an airbase. If you are not able to take the airbase in the beginning of the battle, but keep it on mind, if the enemy will leave the airbase for some garrisons, then you can use this opportunity to go back to the airbase and retake it. Yeah. So this is very, very important sector. Strategic sector. The only strategic sector on this map is this airbase. Garrisons are important, but not that much as airbase. So multi-role fighters, pretty much this. Well, multi-role fighters are perfect here as well, because they have bombs and rocket and they can pretty easy fight with this defense aircraft. So they are very good in flipping over the garrisons. A little bit less in dogfight with fighter. Obviously, fighters have advantage. So to go into the middle of the map, it's going to be risky, specifically if there is a good human players in light fighters. That can be very risky for multi-role fighters. So they should rather focus on taking over the garrisons than fight in the middle. Yeah, and now that's the same actually for the bombers and ground attackers. So bombers and ground attackers, they doesn't have this huge advantage like when there's a factory or rocket base. When the bomber take the factory or rocket base, it's not so easy for light fighters or multi-role fighters to take it back. So basically bombers and ground attackers should go as well for those garrisons, and middle of the map is not the best place for them, but it's possible that when you're passing to another garrison you can go through the middle of the map, drop your bombs, specifically in tier 10, where the bombers have powerful tail gunner that actually can defend themselves, so they can go on this airbase as well. But ground attacker, I would rather go on the side of the map for the garrisons. That's the main thing, because they can be very easy focused by light fighters and shut down quickly. Bombers not so much. Bombers can very easily defend themselves against the light fighters, but ground attackers are vulnerable. Of course, very good player in ground attacker know how to defend himself, but even in that in this case scenario, this is very hard work for a ground attacker to survive, that kind of stuff. So this is pretty easy layout, so pretty easy tactic. The main thing is this airbase here. If you manage to take this over, this is huge advantage, and it's worth to fight to keep this airfield in your team hands. So this is main sector here. yeah, but that's pretty much it. Pretty easy map. The only strategic position is this airbase. Rest are, of course, garrisons, which are very easy for light fighters and multi-role fighters. Yeah, that's it. Let's move to another map layout, which is a little bit more interesting. Okay, so that's another map layout, and we have a little bit more strategic sectors. We have 2 factories on the left and 2 command center on the right. So 4 strategic sectors and 1 less important forward airstrip. So basically, for the light fighters, this forward airstrip is a target as well, but first they should fight for the command centers. Both of those command centers are pretty much important, and light fighters should be capable of dealing with those sectors. Maybe this first one, of course, some of your team will come here with bombs, so light fighters doesn't have to do it by its own, you know. So this one's gonna be easy, but this one's gonna be contested by enemy, so that's gonna be big fight here. And if it's won, then definitely you should go for the airstrip, because this airstrip is the rest point, much closer to all those sectors. So it is important, but not that significantly, obviously. So light fighters have, like, let's say, right side of the map to work on. Not much they can do on the factory, unless, of course, we have human player in a ground attackers. Then light fighters can actually shut down the ground attacker if need over this factory. But mainly we should focus on the right side of the map in light fighters, and we leave the left side for the ground attacker bombers and whatever multi-role with rockets and bombs. So heavy fighters here, let's move for the heavy fighters, and this is actually more interesting for heavy fighters. So if I would play in a heavy fighter here, so I will look on the enemy team, and if enemy team doesn't have a human player in a bomber and ground attacker, only bots, then I will go straight through this, straight to the this factory, which is far away from my rest point, and I would engage those bots in here in order to flip over this factory into our team hands. But if there is a human player in enemy team on a bomber or ground attacker, that rather wouldn't work, because this is too big distance, too far away. So I would rather go with my bombs in here, drop bombs for this factory, and then wait for the bombers, which should be on the way here, and then we can intercept them and shut them down over the factory, and we can take over the factory. So I would rather play on the left side of the map to support my bombers, my ground attackers, in order to take those strategic position like factories. And if need, sometimes you can go with your heavy fighter and intercept the bomber flight from command center. So you buy a little bit more time for your factory to, you know, add extra 80 points. So, and of course, that's one of the options. You can also go for some other players, like, you know, key players in the game. You can try go for the command center, but more important are this is left side of the map. So I would rather stick to the left side, and if those factories in our team, then from there you can try do something else, of course, or focus on defending those 2 factories. Pretty often, if I defend only those 2 factories, that's enough to win the game in heavy fighter. Now let's move to the multi-role. Now multi-role fighters have those 2 jobs. They can go on the left side of the map, focus on those factories, destroy the ground attackers, and some ground targets, but that's not the best way, specifically if most of the multi-role fighters doesn't fly too high, so they don't fly on high altitude, and they're gonna be struggle to get up and take down the bombers, which definitely gonna work over this side of the map. So it is an option, but yeah, if there is a human player in a bomber, that's That's a big challenge for the multi-role fighter. So there's another option. You can go for the command center, and thanks to bombs and rockets, you can destroy high-value targets on the ground and help your team to take over the command centers. That's so basically you need to take a look on enemy team and your team and analyze where your multi-role fighter was going to be needed most by your teams, and then you decide, are you going to go left or are you going to go right, because that's very important. If you make mistake here and you go on the left and you waste your time and enemy will take both those command centers, then this is very bad. And the same is on other side. If you go here and you take those command centers, but enemy have 2 factories, this is very bad, because usually this bomber flight, bomber formation from command center doesn't gonna reach the factory on time, and the factory will reload extra 80 points, and this is huge advantage. So you really need to have a good think where you're gonna go, on the left or right, and where your plane will be most needed. Middle of the map is rather less important, like secondary objective. You don't have to worry about that too much, because it's just a rest point, that's nothing else. Of course that give you extra 3 points every 5 seconds, but there are better sectors on this map than forward airstrip, let's say. And let's move to the bombers and ground attackers. And so bombers and ground attackers, so pretty much very similar to the multi-role fighter. They have to analyze where to go first, but usually I would go for a factory. That's more important for me. But again, you have to take a look on your own team, and if you have in your own team a human player in a bomber or ground attacker, you'll have to take a look where is he going. If he's going for the command center, then you have to go for the factory, and when he's going for the factory, then you may need to go for the command center, and so on. So that's no point to go together on one sector with 2 ground attackers or bomber and ground attackers, and because you're greedy or whatever it is, you just not pay attention. You need to pay attention, because this is a significant difference. If you are able to take command center and factory simultaneously, it's much better than 2 planes over the factory, and they do some points, they take the factory, but we're gonna lose 2 command centers, and what then? So pretty much that's the game plan for bombers. They have to focus those factories. You have to analyze the situation, where is your bomber or ground attacker needed, and again keep telling that to my fellas, that keep an eye on those factories. When you take over the factory and like enemy players or enemy bots, whatever, take over this factory back, then you have like 30 seconds of lockdown of every sectors. You need to be aware of this, that this has happened, so you go straight away there, you make yourself ready, and you retake this factory before the factory is going to reload 80 points. That's the main thing. If you retake it like few seconds after a reload, then sorry, that's bad. That's a bit too late. So this is most important thing for the bombers and ground attackers, to keep those factories in our team hands, and do not let enemy to hold those factories for long enough for them to add extra 80 points. Alright, so I think that's it now. There's of course a little bit more map layouts, but I just want to give you a general idea how you should think about these maps, and how you should think in the beginning of the engagement about the tactics and what you're gonna do and how you're gonna do. Anyway, listen guys, this is almost an hour video. It's just scaring me, and yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for watching, whoever managed to watch that to the end. And if you like it, please leave a like, and thanks guys, and see you in the next one.